She helped a lost boy on a stormy night, unaware his father was a powerful mafia boss. 0000. Hello, is anyone home? Knock, knock. Lily spun around toward the door, her heart pounding as if it would burst. Emma, someone's knocking. Before Lily could stop her, Emma had already slid off her chair and hurried across the freezing floor. The faint porch light flickered through the rain-streaked glass, revealing the small shadow of a child standing just outside the door. Emma reached up, unlocked it, and pulled the door open into the howling wind. A little boy stood there, soaked to the bone and shivering violently. He looked about 8 years old. Emma blinked in horror. "Who are you?" she asked softly, her voice trembling. "Why are you knocking on our door so late in the middle of this storm?" The boy swallowed hard, his voice cracking with fear. My name is... I got lost." He glanced back at the pitch-black street behind him, rain pouring down in sheets. "I was running, and I couldn't find my way back. My phone died. I couldn't call my dad." He held up his dead phone, then looked at Lily and Emma with desperate eyes. "I saw your light was still on. Can I come in for just a little while? I'm so cold, and I'm hungry." The raw, trembling plea made Emma's chest tighten painfully, but Lily stood behind her daughter, her entire body rigid with tension. From behind, Lily's voice cut through, sharply filled with fear. "Emma, step away from the door right now." Emma hesitated, tears welling in her eyes. "But Mom, he's just a kid, like me and Tommy when we got lost at the park last summer." Lily stepped forward on shaky legs, her bare feet cold against the worn linoleum. Her eyes scanned the boy with sharp suspicion. "Mom has seen this kind of thing before," she whispered, her voice thick with dread. "Kids knocking late at night saying they're lost. Sometimes they're not alone. Sometimes adults send them first to scout. Then the house gets robbed, or worse." The storm wind howled fiercely outside, rattling the old doorframe violently. Rain hammered against the thin roof. "Things like that have happened many times in this neighborhood." Lily continued, her voice dropping with heavy tension. "Kids pretending. Then the house gets cleaned out. Or something even worse." The boy's eyes widened in terror. "I'm not pretending," he cried, his voice breaking. "I swear, I just didn't know where else to go. I couldn't call my dad. I don't know the way home." A deathly silence fell between them. Only the sound of pouring rain and Lily's thundering heartbeat remained. Emma looked at the boy carefully, then turned back to her mother, her voice shaking but determined. "Mom, please." Lily didn't answer right away. Her hand gripped the edge of the door so tightly her knuckles turned white. The fierce instinct to protect her daughter was tearing her apart. "Please let him in, Mom." Emma begged, tears rolling down her cheeks. "He just needs to charge his phone. Then he can call his dad. You always teach me we should help others, even when it's the hardest." Those words pierced straight into Lily's heart. She looked at the boy again, standing there trembling in the rain, so small and desperate it tore at her soul. Lily let out a shaky breath, her shoulders heavy with years of poverty, fear, and caution. Life had taught her to be extremely careful, but it had also taught her something else. She stepped forward, her voice firm yet trembling. "All right, you can come in." Relief flooded the boy's face, even as the storm raged behind him. "But listen to me clearly." Lily raised her hand, her tone sharp and tense. "You stay where I can see you. No wandering around. One wrong move and I throw you out. Understand?" "Yes, ma'am," the boy answered quickly, his voice still shaking. He stepped inside. The thin warmth of the apartment wrapped around him instantly. The faint smell of cheap macaroni and cheese from dinner still lingered in the air. Emma slammed the door shut behind him, cutting off the furious sound of the rain. Lily remained standing there, heart-racing eyes, never leaving the boy. The boy sat down slowly on the wobbly chair, still shivering. Lily scooped a small portion of leftover macaroni and cheese into a chipped bowl and placed it in front of him with trembling hands. "Eat," she said quietly, her voice still filled with caution. "Eat slowly. We don't have much, but it's warm." The boy picked up the spoon with both hands. His shoulders gradually relaxed as the first bite brought a bit of comfort. Emma sat across from him, chin resting in her hands, watching with a mix of worry and heartbreak. Outside, the storm continued to roar over Chicago's South Side, and far away in a world of sleek black SUVs and hidden power, a father was desperately searching for his lost son, unaware that in a leaking rundown apartment under the dim yellow light, a dangerous act of kindness had already begun to change everything. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to reflect on the quiet power of kindness, especially when no one else chooses to show it. Share your thoughts in the comments and tell us where you're watching from. Which city and country are you in? And what time is it there right now? It's always amazing to see how stories like this connect people from all over the fictional world. Is it United States, London, maybe Canada, Jamaica, South Africa, or anywhere we want to know? And tell us what you learned at the end of this video. If moments like this remind you of the beauty of humanity, please like the video and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss more powerful stories that celebrate compassion, courage, and the simple acts of kindness that can change a day or so. Life. The rain fell in heavy sheets on the south side of Chicago that cold October night in 2025. Wind howled between the crumbling brick buildings, rattling loose window frames and carrying the sharp smell of wet pavement mixed with garbage from overflowing dumpsters. Streetlights flickered weakly, casting long, broken shadows across cracked sidewalks where puddles had already turned into small, dirty lakes. It was the kind of night that made the whole neighborhood feel smaller, colder, and more forgotten. Inside a tiny rundown apartment on the second floor of a sagging walk-up building, 8-year-old Emma Thompson sat at a wobbly kitchen table, her thin shoulders hunched against the chill that seeped through the walls. The single bulb hanging from the ceiling gave off a faint yellowish glow, barely enough to light the small room. The apartment was pitifully bare, peeling paint on the walls, a threadbare couch with stuffing poking out, and a tiny refrigerator that hummed unevenly and often stayed empty for days. There was no heat tonight. The landlord had shut it off again over unpaid bills, and the wind whistled through gaps around the old windows, making the plastic sheets taped over them flap like desperate flags. Emma's mother, Lily Thompson, stood at the sink, her hands red and raw from washing the few dishes they owned. Lily was only 28, but the years of struggle had carved deep lines of exhaustion into her young face. She was painfully thin, her cheekbones sharp under pale skin that had lost its healthy glow long ago. Sleep-deprived circles darkened her eyes and her clothes. An old sweater full of holes and faded jeans hung loosely on her malnourished frame. She had worked a double shift at the diner again today, serving plates of greasy food to people who barely looked at her, then come home to find the electricity flickering and the rent notice taped to the door once more. Another eviction warning. Another month of choosing between food and keeping the lights on. The unfairness of it all pressed on her chest like a heavy stone. "Emma, honey, finish your homework and get under the blankets soon," Lily said softly, her voice tired but gentle. She always tried to sound calm for her daughter even when fear and humiliation burned inside her. "It is getting late, and the rain is not stopping." Emma nodded, her small fingers gripping a stub of pencil. She was drawing on the back of an old receipt because they could not afford new paper. Her stomach growled quietly. She had only eaten a small bowl of plain oatmeal earlier, the kind made with water because there was no milk left. At 8 years old, Emma already understood too much how her mother cried silently at night, when she thought no one could hear, how the other kids at school whispered about her worn-out shoes and the free lunch tickets, how the world seemed to punish them for being poor, without ever giving them a chance to climb out. A sudden loud knock echoed through the apartment, cutting through the sound of the rain. It was firm, urgent, and completely unexpected at this hour. Lily froze, her heart leaping into her throat. Her hands tightened around the edge of the sink. Who could that be? She whispered, more to herself than to Emma. Suspicion and fear flooded her instantly. In this neighborhood, late-night knocks rarely brought anything good. Debt collectors, angry landlords, or worse. She had seen too many families destroyed by sudden trouble. Her mind raced with horrible possibilities, another eviction threat delivered in person or someone from the streets looking for easy targets. She felt dizzy for a moment, a wave of numbness washing over her as anxiety tightened her chest. "Mommy, someone is at the door," Emma said, sliding off her chair. Her eyes were wide with a mix of curiosity and worry, but there was also a spark of compassion that never seemed to leave her, no matter how hard life became. "Stay back, baby," Lily said quickly, her voice rising with protective urgency. She moved toward the door on shaky legs, her bare feet cold against the worn linoleum. She peered through the peephole, but the rain and darkness outside blurred everything into shifting shadows. Another knock came, heavier this time, accompanied by the faint sound of a child's voice muffled by the storm. Lily's inner turmoil grew sharper. She was powerless here, poor, exhausted, and alone with her daughter in a city that often felt like it had turned its back on people like them. The humiliation of their situation burned sleeping in coats because the heat was off, skipping meals so Emma could eat, enduring cold, wind-filled nights where the rain leaked through the ceiling and soaked their few belongings. Why did everything always go wrong for them? Why did the world keep stripping away even the smallest dignities? But Emma, with the pure heart of a child who had known only hardship yet still chose kindness, reached up for the lock. "Mommy, what if someone needs help? Like how you always say we should be good to people even when it is hard." Lily hesitated, torn between fierce maternal instinct and the soft, timid voice of her daughter. Her own past had taught her caution, years of broken promises, absent help, and unfair hardships that left her guarded and fearful. Yet something in Emma's words pierced through the fear. "All right, but stay behind me," she said at last, her voice trembling slightly. She unlocked the door and pulled it open just a crack. Cold wind and rain rushed in, carrying the chill deep into the apartment. Standing there soaked to the bone and shivering violently was a small boy no older than 8. His dark hair was plastered to his forehead, and his thin jacket offered almost no protection against the storm. His eyes were wide with terror and exhaustion, and he clutched a small dead phone in his trembling hands. "Please," the boy said, his voice cracking. "I got lost. I was running, and I could not find my way back. My phone died. Can I come in for just a little while? I am so cold and hungry." Lily's heart clenched with an overwhelming mix of pity and suspicion. She studied the boy carefully, her mind flashing with old warnings about strangers using children as bait for robberies or worse. Horror and anxiety twisted inside her. What if this was a trap? What if opening the door brought danger crashing into their already fragile world? She felt a wave of dizziness and leaned against the doorframe, her body weak from lack of sleep and proper food. Yet the boy's trembling form, so small and pitiful against the pouring rain, mirrored too closely the misery she and Emma endured every day. Unreasonable unfairness surged in her chest. Why should any child suffer like this in a city full of lights and wealth, just a few miles away? Emma peeked from behind her mother, her small face softening instantly. "Mommy, he is just a kid. Like me and Tommy when we got lost at the park last summer. We cannot leave him out there." Tommy Riley, Emma's 8-year-old best friend who had been staying over because his own broken home offered even less safety, stood a few steps back. His face hardened with distrust. "Do not let him in," he whispered urgently. "Strangers, especially ones who look like they come from somewhere better, only bring trouble. My dad used to say stuff like that before he left us with nothing." The inner conflict raged violently inside Lily. Guarded and fearful, she wanted to slam the door and protect her daughter at all costs. But compassion, the same quiet strength that had kept her going through endless, humiliating days, standing in food lines, facing judgmental stares at the welfare office, enduring cold nights where wind howled through cracks and left them, huddled together for warmth, would not let her turn the boy away. Her voice came out soft, timid, and polite, the way it often did when exhaustion and fear mixed. "All right, you can come in for a little while, but you stay where I can see you, okay?" The boy nodded quickly, relief flooding his young face as he stepped inside, warm air thin as it was wrapped around him. The faint smell of the simple macaroni and cheese Lily had stretched for dinner earlier still lingered in the kitchen. Emma closed the door quickly against the storm, and for a moment the apartment felt just a fraction less empty. Lily moved cautiously, her steps heavy with the weight of responsibility. She ladled a small portion of leftover macaroni and cheese into a chipped bowl, the bright orange kind from the box that had become a staple in their impoverished home because it was cheap and filling, and set it in front of the boy with a gentle hand. "Eat slowly," she said quietly. "There is not much, but it is warm." The boy picked up the spoon with both hands, his shoulders loosening as the first bite brought comfort. Emma watched him with quiet fascination, resting her chin in her hands. Tommy remained wary, arms crossed, but even he could not hide the flicker of empathy in his eyes. Outside, the rain continued to pour, but inside the small, pitiful apartment, a fragile act of kindness had begun. Lily stood by the counter, arms wrapped around herself, her mind swirling with fear and a deep-growing curiosity about this lost boy. Who was he? Where had he come from on such a terrible night? The unfairness of her own life pressed harder. Malnourished, sleep-deprived, powerless against bills and broken systems, yet here she was offering what little she had. Unbeknownst to them all, far across the city, in a world of sleek black vehicles and shadowed power, a wealthy and powerful man named Jake Harlan sat in his fortified office, staring at missed calls on his phone. Jake was fair-skinned, American-born, and carried the quiet authority of someone who had built an empire through legitimate construction and trucking businesses while navigating far darker currents beneath. His broad shoulders filled his tailored coat, and his sharp blue eyes held depths of emotion few ever saw. Tonight those eyes burned with gnawing guilt and consuming remorse. His son had slipped away earlier during a moment of distraction, and the weight of that failure tore at him violently. He, a man who commanded respect and fear in equal measure, felt utterly powerless in the face of a father's worst fear. Inner conflict raged inside him. The life he had chosen for success and protection now threatened the one person he loved most. He would find his boy no matter the cost. even if it meant facing rival factions on rain-slick streets and tense, unexpected confrontations that tested his control without crossing into chaos. As Jake rose and ordered his men to begin the search, something deeper stirred in his heart, a fierce protective instinct that went beyond duty. Little did he know that his son had found temporary shelter in the most unlikely place. A tiny leaking apartment where a destitute mother and her compassionate daughter had opened their door, despite their own extreme poverty and fear. The night stretched on the rain, unrelenting, but in that modest kitchen, under the dim bulb, 3 children and 1 exhausted woman sat together. Quiet, emotional stillness settled for a moment as the boy ate. Yet inside each heart turmoil brewed Lily's anxiety and guarded confusion. Emma's pure curiosity and kindness, Tommy's distrust, and the boy's lingering terror. The stark gap between their world of humiliating hardship and the powerful forces moving through the city outside only grew more vivid with every passing minute. And somewhere in the distance, engines rumbled to life as a powerful man began his desperate search. His heart already heavy with remorse, that would soon collide with an act of simple human warmth he could never have expected. The storm outside showed no sign of easing as the minutes ticked past midnight in October of 2025. Rain hammered against the thin windows of the tiny South Side apartment, each gust of wind forcing cold drafts through every crack and gap in the old building. The single hanging bulb in the kitchen cast a weak, warm glow over the small table, but it could not chase away the deep chill that had settled into the bones of everyone inside. The apartment remained a picture of absolute humiliating poverty, walls with peeling paint that revealed layers of neglect from years of unpaid repairs, a sagging couch missing half its cushions, and a refrigerator that stood nearly empty, except for a half carton of expired milk and a few packets of instant macaroni and cheese. Lily Thompson had stretched the last box that evening, boiling water on a stove that sometimes sputtered and died when the power flickered. Lily stood near the counter, her thin arms wrapped tightly around her chest as if to hold herself together. At 28 years old, she looked far older from the endless grind, malnourished and sleep-deprived. Her frame was painfully slight, her cheeks hollow, and her hands trembled slightly from exhaustion, and the constant anxiety that never fully left her. Nights like this were 2 common cold, wind-filled evenings, where she and Emma huddled under thin blankets listening to the landlord's threats or the distant sounds of the city that offered no mercy to people like them. The unfairness tore at her heart with violent intensity. Why did the world punish the desperate so relentlessly? Why did bills pile up while opportunities slipped away, leaving her powerless, humiliated, and barely able to provide even the simplest meal for her daughter? A wave of dizziness washed over her as she watched the soaked boy eat, numbness spreading through her limbs. She felt confused and guarded horror, flickering at the edges of her thoughts. What if this act of opening the door brought unseen danger into their fragile sanctuary? The boy, still shivering slightly, despite the modest warmth, spooned the creamy macaroni and cheese slowly, his small hands clutching the side utensil as though afraid the food might vanish. It was the bright orange, comforting kind that many American families turn to in tough times, simple, filling, and nostalgic even in hardship. Emma sat across from him, her 8-year-old face lit with quiet curiosity and compassion. She swung her legs gently under the table, her worn sneakers with holes in the toes brushing the linoleum. Tommy Riley, her best friend, remained a few steps back, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. His own home was little better, another broken family in the same neglected neighborhood, and his young heart carried deep distrust of anything that smelled of power or strangers. "You can have more if you want," Emma said softly, her voice carrying that pure, unfiltered kindness that seemed untouched by the hardships around her. "Mommy always says we do not let anyone leave hungry, even when there is not much." Lily managed a small, timid smile, her voice polite and gentle as she addressed the boy, mindful of his youth and her own place as the adult in the room. "Yes, eat slowly, child. There is enough for tonight." Inside, however, her emotions churned with increasing intensity. Suspicion still lingered like a shadow. Years of unreasonable injustices had taught her to fear the unknown. Eviction notices, judgmental stares at the food pantry, cold nights where wind howled through the apartment and left them shivering until morning. These memories assaulted her with numbing force, yet watching the boy's shoulders relax as he ate stirred something deeper. A burning curiosity mixed with an unexpected surge of attachment. This child, lost and vulnerable on such a terrible night, reminded her too painfully of Emma and Tommy. The disparity felt absurdly cruel. One world of endless struggle, another presumably of comfort just beyond the rain-soaked streets. Tommy shifted uncomfortably, his young face hardened by experiences no child should carry. "I still think we should be careful," he muttered loud enough for Lily to hear, but soft enough not to frighten the boy. People with nice phones and clothes sometimes pretend. My dad had things like that before he disappeared, and left us with nothing but bills and empty cupboards. His words carried the weight of his own inner torment, a quiet anger at the unfairness that stripped families bare. A moment of condensed emotional stillness fell over the small kitchen. The only sounds were the steady patter of rain, the faint hum of the old refrigerator, and the soft clink of the spoon against the chipped bowl. Lily leaned against the counter, her body aching from double shifts at the diner where she served endless plates while customers barely glanced at her tired face. The humiliation burned standing in line for assistance, explaining to Emma why new shoes were impossible this month, enduring the cold drafts that made sleep fitful and painful. She felt a deep disorientation, as if the simple act of letting the boy in had tilted her carefully balanced world of survival. Horror at the risks mixed with anxiety for her daughter, yet a growing warmth, timid and hesitant, began to bloom. What if kindness was not a weakness, but the only light left in their darkness? Outside in the storm-lashed streets of Chicago, Jake Harlan moved with purposeful intensity. The powerful, fair-skinned American mafia boss sat in the back of a sleek black SUV, his broad frame filling the leather seat as rain streaked the tinted windows. His legitimate construction and trucking empire had made him wealthy beyond measure. Private security details, custom vehicles, and influence that reached into city halls. Yet tonight, none of it eased the violent conflict tearing through his heart. Gnawing remorse consumed him. His son had slipped away earlier amid a moment of distraction during a tense business matter, and the guilt was like a blade twisting deeper with every passing minute. Jake's sharp blue eyes, usually steady with command, now burned with inner torment. He, a man who navigated rival factions with calculated precision, felt utterly powerless as a father. How had he let this happen? The life he had built for protection and success now threatened the one innocent soul he cherished most. Violent emotional conflict raged inside him, remorse for the distance his world had created, a fierce protective love that overshadowed everything else. Find him. Jake ordered his men in a low, controlled voice as the convoy navigated rain-slicked alleys. Tension heightened when they encountered an unexpected street confrontation with scouts from a rival faction. The opposing group blocked a narrow intersection, their vehicles idling aggressively under the downpour. Words were exchanged, sharp, bold, and laced with veiled threats, but Jake held his men back from escalation. "This is not the night for that," he said firmly, his tone carrying the weight of authority. The rivals eventually backed off, but the encounter left a bitter edge, heightening the suspense of the search. Jake's hands clenched subtly, his inner world, a storm of guilt and determination. He would rescue his son at any cost yet. The image of a modest light in a forgotten neighborhood tugged at something deeper, an overwhelming, passionate surge of emotion he could not yet name, born from the first reports filtering back about a small apartment where a kind woman had opened her door. Back in the apartment, the boy finished the macaroni and cheese, his eyes brighter now. Emma slid a small, slightly bruised apple toward him from their meager fruit bowl. "We have one left. You can share it with us if you want." The simple gesture created another pocket of quiet, emotional stillness. Lily watched her heart pulling in conflicting directions. She felt desperate and powerless in her poverty, yet a fierce curiosity about this lost child and the world he might come from began to soften her guarded fear. Shock and confusion swirled as she imagined the stark gap, her leaking roof and empty cabinets, versus the wealth that surely waited somewhere in the city's glittering towers. Tommy remained watchful but said less, his distrust slowly cracking under the warmth of the shared moment. "Just do not get too comfortable," he whispered to Emma when the boy was not looking. "Powerful people do not stay." Lily poured water into clean but mismatched glasses, her movements careful and polite. "Tell us if you need anything else," she said softly to the boy, her voice timid yet steady, appropriate for speaking to a child who carried his own unseen burdens. Inside her, emotions intensified, violently horror at the risks she had taken, anxiety for what tomorrow might bring with another eviction threat taped to the door. Yet an emerging attachment, passionate and protective toward the small act of Pasquale, sheltering a stranger's child. The unfairness of her life felt sharper than ever malnourished nights, sleep stolen by worry, the humiliating reality of choosing between heat and food, while the powerful drove past in luxury. Yet here in this pitiful space, kindness created a fragile bridge. As the rain continued its relentless rhythm, the apartment held a condensed warmth amid the storm. Lily sat down at the edge of the table, her body heavy with exhaustion, feeling a deep numbness give way to quiet wonder. The boy's presence had stirred something profound, an overwhelming trust beginning to form despite every reason for fear. For Jake Harlan, racing through the Chicago night with his men, the search grew more urgent after another tense standoff with rival scouts on a darkened corner. His remorse burned hotter, his powerful frame tense, with the weight of responsibility. Little did he know how closely his son's temporary safety was tied to the destitute woman whose simple hospitality was quietly challenging his hardened world. In that small kitchen under the dim light, the children's soft voices mingled with the rain. Moments of stillness wrapped around them like a thin blanket, but beneath the surface hearts tore with increasing intensity. Lily's mix of guarded fear and budding attachment, Emma's pure compassion, Tommy's wary protectiveness, and the boys' gradual relief. The extreme poverty of their existence stood in painful contrast to the unseen wealth moving through the city, evoking a deep, moving sympathy for a mother doing everything she could with almost nothing. The night stretched on, but in that humble space, cautious hospitality had begun to weave threads of unexpected connection even as powerful forces drew steadily closer. The rain continued its steady drumming against the windows of the tiny Southside apartment well past midnight in October of 2025. Inside, the air had grown a fraction warmer from the shared body heat and the faint steam rising from empty bowls, but the chill from the storm still lingered in every corner. The apartment stood as a stark testament to absolute humiliating poverty, peeling paint revealing decades of water damage, a threadbare rug worn thin in paths from the door to the kitchen, and windows sealed poorly with plastic that fluttered with each gust. The refrigerator hummed unevenly, its light revealing mostly empty shelves, except for a few packets of instant macaroni and cheese, and a single bruised apple saved for breakfast. Lily Thompson had endured countless such nights, cold, wind-filled evenings where sleep came in fragments because of worry over the next rent notice or the next meal. She was painfully thin, malnourished from too many skipped dinners to ensure Emma ate, and sleep-deprived from double shifts at the diner, where she smiled politely through aching feet and judgmental glances. Lily sat at the edge of the wobbly table, her hands folded tightly in her lap to hide their slight tremble. Confusion and fear swirled inside her with growing intensity. She had let a stranger's child into their home despite every instinct screaming caution. What if this brought trouble? The unreasonable injustices of her life pressed harder eviction warnings taped to the door food pantry lines where she felt invisible and ashamed, cold nights where wind howled through cracks and left her in Ellen Dellery and Ender. Emma huddled together, shivering until dawn. She felt dizzy for a moment, a wave of numbness spreading as anxiety tightened her chest like an iron band. Yet beneath the guarded suspicion, a quiet curiosity burned, along with an emerging attachment to the small act of sheltering the boy. Her voice remained soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to him. "Are you feeling a little better now?" she asked, gently mindful of his youth and her own careful place in the world. The boy nodded, his small face less pale after the warm food. Emma sat close, her 8-year-old eyes filled with compassionate wonder, while Tommy lingered nearby, his distrust still evident but softening in the shared quiet. A moment of condensed emotional stillness settled over the kitchen. The faint sound of rain, the steady breathing of the children, and the gentle clink of a glass as Lily poured water. In that stillness, her inner world tore violently, horror at the risks she had taken for her daughter's sake, anxiety over the powerlessness that defined their days, yet a passionate surge of protectiveness toward this lost child who mirrored their own vulnerability. Outside, the storm-lashed streets of Chicago told a different story of power and movement. Jake Harlan rode in the lead black SUV, his fair-skinned American-born frame commanding the space with quiet authority. As the wealthy and powerful head of a successful construction and trucking empire with legitimate businesses that masked deeper currents of influence, Jake possessed resources. Few could imagine: fleets of vehicles, private security, and connections that reached across the city. Yet tonight, none of it dulled the gnawing remorse and violent inner conflict ripping through his heart. His son had disappeared earlier, and the guilt was a living torment, consuming him with every passing minute. How could he, a man who commanded respect and navigated rival factions with calculated strength, have let his guard slip? The life he had built for protection now threatened the one person who mattered most. Remorse burned like fire, regret for the distance his world sometimes created, a fierce, paternal love that overshadowed every other emotion. The convoy moved with purpose through rain-slicked alleys when an unexpected confrontation arose. Rival scouts from an opposing faction blocked a narrow intersection, their vehicles idling boldly under the downpour. Tension crackled in the air as words were exchanged, sharp challenges and veiled warnings, but Jake held his men in check with a steady command. "We are here for my son, not for this," he said firmly, his voice carrying the weight of authority without escalation. The rivals eventually withdrew into the shadows, but the encounter left a heightened sense of suspense hanging over the search. Jake's hands tightened subtly on the armrest, his inner turmoil escalating into a storm of remorse and determination. He would find his boy no matter the obstacles. Yet reports filtering back about a modest light in a forgotten neighborhood stirred something deeper. An overwhelming, passionate, emotional upheaval from the very first hints of the kindness that had sheltered his child. A burning attachment began to form in his heart toward the unknown woman who had opened her door, a fierce protective instinct mixed with profound respect that clashed violently with his hardened world. Back in the apartment, the boy glanced at his phone, now showing a faint charge. "I think I can try calling my dad soon," he said quietly. Lily felt a fresh wave of shock and confusion wash over her dizziness, making her grip the table edge as she imagined the world this child might return to so far removed from their pitiful reality. The disparity felt absurdly cruel, her leaking ceiling and empty cupboards against the unseen wealth that surely awaited him. Unreasonable unfairness tore at her. Why did some endure endless humiliation while others moved through life with such ease? She felt powerless, yet a timid hope flickered alongside the fear. Emma offered the boy a small folded piece of paper with a crayon drawing she had made earlier. "This is our house," she said softly, "so you remember it is safe here." The simple gesture created another pocket of quiet emotional stillness. Tommy watched his young face reflecting his own inner conflict, distrust of powerful strangers warring with the warmth he could not deny. Lily's heart ached with moving depth. The mindset of someone once desperately poor now offering what little she had stirred a passionate attachment to the moment despite the risks. Another tense street confrontation unfolded for Jake's convoy a few blocks away. Rival vehicles appeared suddenly from a side street lights, cutting through the rain in a bold challenge. Voices rose in the night, firm exchanges about territory and respect. But Jake diffused the situation with commanding presence, refusing to let it derail the search. "Tonight is not for conflict," he stated clearly. His men stood ready, yet the encounter amplified the suspense, reminding him of the shadows he navigated daily. Inside the SUV, his remorse intensified violently. The thought of his son out there, possibly finding shelter with strangers, tore at him with numbing force. Yet the image of that small apartment light fueled an intense emotional response. A profound burning love and respect for the destitute woman who had shown compassion where others might have turned away. This attachment grew from the first moment, clashing with his powerful life and creating deep psychological conflict. In the apartment, Lily stood to check the windows against the wind, her thin frame swaying slightly from exhaustion. Another absurdly unfair event had struck earlier that week. The electricity had flickered for hours due to unpaid bills, forcing her to choose between keeping food cold or paying for bus fare to work. The humiliation lingered, standing in assistance lines, explaining their situation with a soft, polite voice while feeling invisible. She experienced deep disorientation, a painful numbness as anxiety and curiosity battled within her. Horror at potential danger mixed with a growing trust in the simple humanity unfolding at her table. Her inner world felt violently torn, the desperate poverty that left her malnourished and sleep-deprived against the unexpected warmth of sheltering a child. The boy finally dialed the number. The phone rang once, twice. On the other end, Jake answered immediately, his voice cracking with relief that sent a surge of emotion through him. The call connected the two worlds, the modest kitchen filled with quiet kindness, and the powerful convoy moving through stormy streets. Jake's heart swelled with overwhelming attachment and respect toward the woman who had protected his son. A passionate, emotional upheaval that deepened his inner torment. He would arrive soon, shadows and all. As the conversation ended, a heavy silence fell once more in the apartment. Lily felt her knees weaken slightly from the shock and confusion, yet a fierce protective attachment had begun to take root despite every reason for fear. The rain continued outside, but inside cautious hospitality had woven something profound amid the disparity of wealth and poverty. The night held its breath, emotions churning with increasing intensity. Lily's mix of guarded anxiety and budding trust, the children's innocent bonds, and Jake's remorse-filled determination drawing steadily closer. In that small, pitiful space, a mother's quiet strength stood against the weight of an unjust world, evoking deep sympathy for her silent struggles and the compassionate light she still chose to share. The rain had eased into a steady drizzle by the time the first hints of dawn touched the Chicago skyline in October of 2025, but the cold dampness clung to everything in the tiny Southside apartment. Inside, the single bulb still cast its weak, yellowish light over the wobbly kitchen table, illuminating the chipped bowls and mismatched glasses that spoke volumes about the family's daily struggles. The apartment embodied the absolute extremity of humiliating poverty walls, streaked with water stains from countless leaks. The landlord ignored a sagging couch with exposed springs and windows that rattled with every passing truck, let in drafts that made nights feel endless. Lily Thompson moved slowly, her thin, malnourished frame aching from another sleepless night spent worrying. She was painfully slight, her cheeks hollow from too many meals skipped, so Emma could eat her eyes heavy with the exhaustion of double shifts at the diner where tips were scarce, and customers often looked through her as if she were invisible, sleep-deprived and powerless against the mounting bills she had endured. Far too many cold, wind-filled nights huddled with her daughter under thin blankets, listening to the eviction notice rustle on the door like a constant threat. Lily stood near the table, her hands clasped tightly to hide their tremble. The boy had spoken to his father on the phone, and the man's voice had carried an unmistakable urgency that sent ripples of anxiety through her. Confusion and fear intensified inside her with violent force. Who was this father who could summon such immediate response on a stormy night? What kind of world did he inhabit so distant from her own pitiful reality? She felt a wave of dizziness wash over her numbness, spreading through her limbs as horror flickered at the edges of her thoughts. What if this powerful arrival brought danger or judgment into their fragile home? The unreasonable injustices of her life assaulted her anew, another eviction warning just days earlier, forcing her to choose between paying rent or buying groceries. Standing in long lines at the food pantry, only to receive the bare minimum while feeling the sting of shame. Enduring judgmental stares when she explained why Emma's shoes had holes. These absurdly unfair events tore at her heart, leaving her desperate and guarded, yet a soft, timid politeness remained in her voice when she addressed the children. "Stay close, please," she said gently, her tone appropriate for the weight of the moment and her careful role as the protector. Emma and Tommy sat quietly at the table, their young faces reflecting a mix of anticipation and lingering wariness. The boy clutched his now charging phone relief, evident in his posture. But the atmosphere in the small room grew heavier with expectation. A moment of condensed emotional stillness fell as the rain pattered softly outside the faint hum of the old refrigerator, the children's even breathing, and Lily's quiet footsteps as she straightened the threadbare rug. In that quiet, her inner turmoil, escalated shock, and deep disorientation at the sudden shift from isolation to impending visit anxiety over her powerlessness, clashing with a burning curiosity about the man who would soon arrive. The disparity felt cruelly vivid, her leaking roof and empty cupboards against the wealth that allowed someone to command such swift action through the night. Far across the city, Jake Harlan's convoy cut through the dimly lit streets with purposeful intensity. The wealthy and powerful American mafia boss rode in the lead vehicle, his fair-skinned frame commanding respect even in silence. His legitimate construction and trucking businesses had built him an empire of sleek black SUVs, private security details, and influence that extended through boardrooms and shadowed alleys alike. Yet tonight, material wealth offered no comfort against the gnawing remorse and violent inner conflict raging within him. Finding his son safe had brought overwhelming relief. But the guilt of the earlier lapse tore deeper. How had his demanding world allowed such a moment of vulnerability? Remorse consumed him like a slow fire, fueling a fierce paternal love that overshadowed every calculation of power. As the convoy approached the south side, another tense street confrontation erupted unexpectedly. Rival scouts from an opposing faction appeared at a rain-slicked intersection, their vehicles positioning boldly to challenge passage. Sharp words exchanged in the drizzle veiled threats about territory and respect, but Jake diffused the situation with commanding calm, refusing to let it escalate or delay his purpose. "This night is for family," he stated firmly, his voice steady despite the storm inside. The rivals withdrew, but the encounter heightened the suspense, reminding Jake of the constant shadows he navigated. His heart burned with passionate upheaval toward the unknown woman, who had sheltered his son an intense protective attachment, forming from the very first reports of her kindness, clashing violently with his hardened life, and creating profound emotional layers of respect mixed with remorse. The SUVs finally stopped outside the rundown, building their polished surfaces gleaming incongruously against the cracked sidewalks and overflowing dumpsters. Jake stepped out his broad shoulders, filling his tailored coat, flanked by a few discreet men who remained at a respectful distance. He approached the door with measured steps, the weight of his world contrasting sharply with the humble entrance before him. Lily heard the engines and felt her knees weaken slightly. Horror and anxiety surged as she moved to the door, her thin frame swaying with exhaustion. She opened it cautiously, revealing the powerful man standing there. Jake's presence filled the doorway without effort, wealth evident in every detail from his immaculate attire to the quiet authority that seemed to command the very air around him. Lily experienced extreme psychological shock, a numbing dizziness that made her grip the doorframe for balance. This was the father. The stark gap between their worlds hit her with violent intensity, her malnourished, sleep-deprived existence against his evident power and resources. Confusion swirled, fearful yet curiously drawn to the quiet depth in his eyes. Jake looked at Lily, then passed her to his son, and the relief in his expression was unmistakable. Gratitude flooded him, but it was layered with deeper emotion. An overwhelming, passionate surge of respect and attachment toward this destitute woman who had opened her door despite her own hardships. From the first moment, a burning protective instinct took hold, clashing with his inner torment and creating violent conflict in his heart. How could someone with so little give so freely when his own world often demanded so much? "Thank you," Jake said, his voice steady yet carrying unmistakable emotion, "for taking him in, for keeping him safe." He reached into his coat and placed a thick envelope on the small table, a substantial sum that represented security far beyond what Lily could imagine in her pitiful circumstances. Lily stared at the envelope, her soft, timid voice emerging politely yet firmly. "I cannot accept this, sir. We helped because he was a child in need, not for payment." Her words carried quiet dignity, but inside turmoil tore violently desperation from endless, humiliating struggles. Cold nights, skipped meals, the constant threat of losing their home made the offer tempting, yet accepting it felt like compromising the one thing poverty had not taken from her: her principles. Shock and confusion left her disoriented, a painful numbness spreading, as she reflected on the mindset of someone once desperately poor, now facing sudden protection from a powerful man. The unfairness felt absurdly cruel. Why did her world demand such constant sacrifice while his offered envelopes that could change everything? Jake paused, studying her with eyes that revealed layers of remorse and respect. The refusal cracked something in his armor, the first real fissure in his controlled world. Most people did not say no to him, yet this thin, exhausted woman stood with principled calm that moved him deeply. His inner conflict intensified, gnawing guilt over his son's ordeal, mixed with a profound, burning attachment to Lily's quiet strength. He saw her poverty in painful detail, the worn surroundings, her malnourished frame, the evidence of sleepless nights, and it stirred violent emotional upheaval, a fierce desire to protect clashing with the realization that true kindness could not be bought. A moment of condensed emotional stillness followed as the envelope remained untouched on the table. Emma and Tommy watched wide-eyed, the boy relieved to be reunited, yet sensing the weight in the air. Tommy's distrust lingered but softened slightly at the exchange. Lily felt her heart tear with increasing intensity, fearful of consequences, curious about this man's depth, yet overwhelmed by a growing trust born from his measured gratitude rather than force. Jake did not press. Instead, he spoke quietly, his powerful presence tempered by genuine emotion. "I understand, but know that I do not forget acts like this." Another absurdly unfair memory surfaced for Lily just last week. Her hours had been cut at the diner due to slow business, leaving her scrambling to cover rent while wealthier parts of the city thrived untouched. The disparity evoked deep sympathy, her utter misery laid bare against his increasing display of restrained power and resources. As Jake prepared to leave with his son, promising to return soon, the apartment held a fragile bridge between worlds. Lily stood in quiet stillness, her inner world violently torn between guarded fear and an emerging passionate attachment to the compassion shown. Jake carried the encounter with him into the drizzle, his remorse deepening into a compelling focal point of respect and protective love that challenged his very armor. The night's events had planted seeds of connection amid the rain, emotions churning with raw intensity. Lily's mix of anxiety and budding trust, Jake's profound inner conflict and attachment, while the extreme poverty of one home stood in heartbreaking contrast to the wealth and power now aware of its quiet light. The drizzle had given way to a gray, overcast morning in October of 2025, when the low rumble of engines once again approached the rundown building on Chicago's South Side. Inside the tiny apartment, Lily Thompson moved about the cramped kitchen with slow, careful steps, her thin, malnourished body still heavy from another restless night. The space remained a heartbreaking portrait of extreme, humiliating poverty. The peeling paint on the walls marked by water stains from repeated leaks. The old couch with its stuffing exposed in places and windows that let in drafts no matter how tightly the plastic was taped. The refrigerator stood nearly empty again, a silent reminder of choices no mother should have to make, whether to pay the latest utility bill or stretch the last packets of instant macaroni and cheese for one more meal. Lily was painfully slight, her cheeks hollow from too many skipped dinners, her eyes shadowed by sleep deprivation after long double shifts at the diner, where customers rarely left generous tips, and the manager often cut hours without brightness. Warning: cold, wind-filled nights had become routine, leaving her shivering under thin blankets with Emma, the eviction notice still taped to the door, like a constant accusation of failure. Lily wiped the wobbly table with a worn cloth, her hands trembling slightly from exhaustion, and the lingering anxiety that never fully left her. The previous night's events replayed in her mind with violent intensity: the lost boy, the powerful father's arrival, the thick envelope she had firmly refused. Confusion and fear churned inside her, growing sharper with every passing hour. What did a man like that truly want? Why had he said he would return? She felt dizzy for a moment, a wave of numbness spreading through her as horror flickered at the thought of judgment or hidden motives entering their fragile world. At the same time, a timid curiosity burned beneath the guarded suspicion, and an unexpected attachment, passionate and intense, had begun to take root from the very first moment of his measured gratitude. The mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty now faced the disorienting possibility of being noticed, even protected by someone of such evident wealth and power. It tore at her heart with numbing force. Emma and Tommy sat at the table, coloring on the back of old receipts with stubby crayons. The boy Jake's son had gone home with his father, but the promise of a return visit hung in the air like an unspoken question. Tommy's young face remained wary, his distrust a shield forged from his own broken home where powerful words had often led to abandonment and pain. "I still do not like this," he muttered to Emma, his voice low. "Men with fancy cars and lots of people around them do not come back just to say thank you. They want something." Emma looked up with her characteristic compassion, her 8-year-old voice soft. "But he seemed nice, Tommy, and the boy was safe here." A quiet, condensed emotional stillness settled over the small kitchen as the children colored, and Lily prepared a simple pot of oatmeal with water, another humble meal born of necessity. In that stillness, Lily's inner turmoil escalated violently. Absurdly unfair events from the past week replayed, her hours cut at the diner due to slow business forcing her to choose between bus fare and groceries, standing in the assistance line while feeling invisible and ashamed, enduring the landlord's latest threat to shut off the heat as winter approached. These humiliations stripped her bare, leaving her desperate and powerless. Yet here she stood, preparing the apartment as best she could for visitors from a world so far removed from her own leaking roof and empty cupboards. The disparity felt cruelly vivid, her malnourished, sleep-deprived existence, against the increasing display of wealth that was about to return. The sound of car doors closing outside broke the quiet. Lily's heart leaped into her throat. She moved to the window, peering through the plastic sheeting, and felt a fresh wave of shock and confusion. The black SUVs were back sleek and polished, standing out sharply against the cracked sidewalks and faded buildings. Jake Harlan stepped out first, his fair-skinned, broad-shouldered frame commanding quiet authority. He was dressed simply yet impeccably, the kind of understated elegance that spoke of resources far beyond anything Lily had ever known. 2 of his men waited discreetly by the vehicles, their presence a subtle reminder of the power he carried. Lily opened the door with unsteady hands, her voice emerging soft, timid, and polite. "Good morning, Mr. Harlan," she said, addressing the older man with careful respect. "Please come in." His son followed close behind, eyes lighting up at the sight of Emma and Tommy. The boy immediately joined them at the table, and soon the children were talking over each other about crayons and simple games, their laughter creating pockets of warmth amid the worn surroundings. Jake remained standing for a moment near the doorway, his sharp blue eyes taking in every detail of the apartment, the threadbare rug, the patched walls, the evidence of endless struggle. The sight stirred violent inner conflict within him, gnawing remorse for his own distractions that had led to his son's ordeal mixed with a profound, burning attachment toward Lily that had taken hold from the very first moment he learned of her kindness. She had refused his money with quiet dignity, and that refusal cracked his armor, further revealing layers of deep emotional torment. How could someone enduring such pitiful conditions still choose compassion over gain? His wealthy world, fleets of vehicles, secure properties, influence that shaped parts of the city felt suddenly hollow in comparison. A fierce protective love surged within him, clashing violently with the calculated life he had built, creating extreme psychological tension that left him momentarily silent. As the children played a makeshift game of catch with a rolled-up sock in the narrow living room, Tommy's distrust sparked into open conflict. He stepped closer to Jake, his young voice bold despite his fear. "Why did you really come back? People like you do not visit places like this unless you want something. My dad used to have nice cars too. And he still left us with nothing but empty cupboards and broken promises." The words landed heavily. Lily felt a wave of horror and anxiety wash over her dizziness, making her reach for the counter to steady herself. She feared the confrontation might offend their powerful visitor, yet she also felt a deep, moving sympathy for Tommy's pain. Another child shaped by unreasonable injustice and abandonment. Her inner world tore violently, guarded fear for her daughter's safety, confusion over Jake's true intentions, and a growing passionate attachment to the quiet respect he showed by not dismissing the boy's challenge. Jake knelt slightly to meet Tommy's eyes, his voice calm and measured, carrying the weight of genuine reflection rather than defensiveness. "You are right to ask that, son. Many men in my position do forget places like this. But your friend's mother gave my boy safety when he had nowhere else to go. That matters more than you know." His words revealed the depth of his remorse guilt over the distance his demanding life had sometimes created between him and his own child. The encounter with rival scouts on the way here had only heightened his inner storm. Another tense, unexpected street confrontation at a nearby intersection, where opposing vehicles had briefly blocked the convoy, forcing sharp but controlled exchanges before Jake's authority prevailed without violence. The suspense of protecting his family while navigating such shadows only deepened his emotional upheaval toward Lily, a compelling focal point of protective love and respect that burned intensely from the first moment. Lily watched the exchange, her heart aching with increasing intensity. Another absurdly unfair memory surfaced just days earlier. She had been denied extra hours at the diner because of a scheduling error, leaving her short on rent and forced to explain to Emma why they might have to move again. The humiliation burned thin, exhausted, powerless. Yet here she stood, witnessing a powerful man listen to a child's pain with unexpected humility. Shock and deep disorientation left her numb for a moment, the mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty, suddenly facing the possibility of being seen and protected by wealth and influence. A passionate trust began to overtake her earlier suspicion, creating violent emotional conflict that left her quietly tearful inside. The children's laughter eventually drew everyone back to lighter moments. Emma shared a small saved cookie broken into pieces so everyone could have some her innocent generosity, creating another condensed emotional stillness. Jake accepted his piece with quiet gratitude, the simple act highlighting the stark disparity his world of resources against their meager offerings. His inner torment deepened remorse for past distractions, clashing with a fierce determination to bridge the gap in whatever way honor allowed. As the visit continued, Tommy's sparks of distrust slowly softened into wary curiosity, though the tension lingered like an undercurrent. Lily remained guarded, yet increasingly drawn to Jake's measured presence, her soft voice polite when offering water or asking if the children needed anything. The morning held both quiet warmth and escalating inner storms. Lily's mix of anxiety and budding attachment, Jake's profound remorse and protective love, the children's innocent bonds forming amid the painful contrast of poverty and power. When Jake and his son finally prepared to leave, promising another visit soon, Lily stood at the door, her heart violently torn between lingering fear and an overwhelming surge of trust. The black SUVs pulled away their polished surfaces, a vivid reminder of the wealth now aware of their small light. In the apartment, quiet, emotional stillness returned, but beneath it, emotions continued to churn with raw, moving depth, evoking sympathy for a mother's silent struggles and the compassionate strength that refused to be extinguished. The gray October skies of 2025 hung low over Chicago's South Side as another day slipped toward evening. Inside the tiny apartment, Lily Thompson stood by the sink, her thin, malnourished hands washing the same few dishes for the third time that day simply to occupy them. The space remained a pitiful testament to extreme, humiliating poverty. The walls bore fresh water stains from the latest leak. The landlord refused to fix the couch, sagged deeper with every use, and the windows rattled with every gust of wind that found its way through the cracks. The refrigerator was almost bare again, holding only a small carton of milk that would soon run out and a few packets of plain oatmeal. Lily was painfully slight, her frame weakened by too many nights of hunger, so Emma could eat first. Her eyes heavy with sleep deprivation after another double shift at the diner where her feet ached and her tips barely covered the bus fare. Home. Cold, wind-filled nights had become her constant companion, leaving her shivering under thin blankets while worrying about the next eviction notice or the next utility shut-off. The unfairness of it all pressed on her with violent intensity. Why did the world keep stripping away even the smallest dignities from those who already had nothing? Lily's inner world churned with increasing turmoil. The visits from Jake Harlan and his son had left her deeply confused and guarded. She felt a burning curiosity mixed with lingering fear. What did a man of such obvious wealth and power truly want from people like them? At times she felt desperate and powerless. At other times a timid hope flickered. Her voice remained soft and polite when she spoke to the children. "Wash your hands before you eat, please," she said gently to Emma and Tommy, her tone careful and appropriate for her role as the weary protector. The children were playing a quiet game at the table with the few crayons they shared, their laughter, a fragile brightness in the dim apartment. Tommy still carried sparks of distrust, but even he had begun to soften in small moments. A condensed emotional stillness settled over the kitchen. The faint scratch of crayons on paper, the distant sound of traffic, and Lily's quiet breathing as she tried to hold herself together. In that stillness, her heart tore violently. Absurdly unfair events from the past week, replayed with numbing force. Her hours cut again at the diner, because of a scheduling mistake made by someone higher up, leaving her short on rent, and forced to explain to Emma why they might lose the lights once more, standing in the assistance line for hours only to be told she needed more paperwork she could not afford to obtain. These humiliations left her dizzy with disorientation and pain. The mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty, now facing the disorienting warmth of repeated visits from a powerful man. Far across the city, Jake Harlan moved through his day with the quiet command that defined his life. The wealthy, fair-skinned American mafia boss oversaw his legitimate construction and trucking empire from a secure office, yet his mind was never far from the small South Side apartment. His broad shoulders carried the weight of responsibility, but tonight they carried something heavier, gnawing remorse that refused to ease. The memory of his son's disappearance still tore at him with violent conflict. How had his demanding world allowed such danger to touch the one person he loved most? A fierce paternal love burned alongside deep emotional layers of guilt, and a passionate protective attachment toward Lily that had taken root from the Pfeiler-Camper-Feimenhoder very first moment he learned of her kindness. She had refused his money with quiet dignity, and that refusal continued to crack his armor, stirring profound respect and an intense emotional upheaval that clashed with the calculated life he had built. As Jake's convoy traveled toward another meeting, an unexpected and brutal ambush erupted on a dimly lit industrial street. Rival faction vehicles suddenly blocked the road ahead and appeared from a side alley, their lights cutting sharply through the gathering dusk. Tense, bold words were exchanged, accusations about territory and respect, creating a charged standoff that heightened suspense without crossing into chaos. Jake's men remained disciplined, but the confrontation escalated as the rivals made clear their intent to challenge his influence. In the heated exchange, shots rang out in warning rather than aimed harm. One bullet grazed Jake's arm, sending a sharp pain through him as he shielded himself behind the vehicle door. Blood soaked his sleeve, but he maintained control, issuing firm commands that forced the rivals to withdraw into the shadows. The ambush left the air thick with danger, reminding everyone of the constant shadows surrounding his world. Wounded and bleeding, Jake felt a wave of violent inner torment crash over him. Remorse for the risks his life brought to those around him mixed with a fierce determination to reach safety. In his pain and disorientation, the only place that came to mind as truly safe was the modest apartment where simple kindness had first sheltered his son. He ordered his driver to head there, the convoy moving with urgent but controlled speed through the streets. Back in the apartment, Lily suddenly heard the low rumble of engines and felt her heart leap with anxiety. She moved to the window, peering out, and a fresh wave of horror washed over her as she saw the black SUVs stop abruptly. Jake stepped out, clutching his arm, blood visible on his coat. The sight sent shock and confusion surging through her dizziness, making her grip the windowsill as numbness spread through her body. Why was he here? Injured fear for her daughter. And the children gripped her, yet a passionate, protective attachment toward this man who had shown respect, rather than force, pulled at her heart with increasing intensity. "Stay inside," Lily said softly but urgently to Emma and Tommy, her voice timid yet steady. She opened the door just enough to see Jake leaning against the vehicle, his powerful frame now vulnerable. "Mr. Harlan, what happened?" Jake looked at her, his sharp blue eyes clouded with pain, but filled with deep emotion. "I need a moment of safety. Just for a short time. My son," he spoke of this place as safe. The children, unable to stay back, peeked out and saw the blood. Emma's eyes widened with compassion. "Mommy, he is hurt, like when I fell last summer." Tommy hesitated, his distrust flaring, but the sight of real pain moved even him. "We have to help," he whispered. In a desperate, heart-pounding sequence, the children acted with innocent bravery. Emma ran for clean towels, the few worn ones they owned. Lily, despite her own exhaustion and fear, tore strips from an old sheet to bandage the wound, her thin hands working carefully. She felt extreme psychological shock, horror at the violence that had touched their door, anxiety over the danger now inside her home. Yet a burning trust and attachment that refused to let her turn him away. The disparity tore at her violently, her pitiful, malnourished existence offering what little it had, while Jake's world of wealth and power suddenly relied on her. Jake sat on the edge of the couch, his broad shoulders tense with pain. The sight of Lily's humble efforts stirred violent inner conflict within him. Remorse for bringing danger to this fragile home clashed with overwhelming gratitude and a profound, passionate, protective love toward her that had grown intensely from the first moment. How could someone enduring such humiliating poverty, cold nights, skipped meals, endless unfair struggles still extend kindness without hesitation? His wealth displayed in the convoy waiting outside, and the resources at his command felt meaningless in this moment. A fierce emotional upheaval tore through him, deepening his commitment to shield this small family, even as his own world threatened to pull him back into shadows. Another tense confrontation brewed outside as one of the rival scouts' vehicles passed slowly down the street, forcing Jake's men to create a quiet diversion without violence. The suspense heightened as the rivals eventually moved on, unaware of the wounded man inside the modest apartment. Inside, quiet, emotional stillness fell as Lily finished bandaging the wound. Emma sat close, offering a small glass of water with her pure compassion. "It is okay to be hurt," she said softly. "We are here." Jake looked at the children, then at Lily, his heart violently torn between the life he had built and the simple humanity before him. The ambush had escalated the drama, leaving his inner world in chaos, gnawing remorse, fierce paternal instinct, and a burning attachment to Lily's quiet strength that created a compelling focal point of emotional depth. Lily felt her knees weaken from the shock and disorientation, yet an overwhelming trust had taken hold, passionate and intense. The absurd unfairness of her life, another cut in hours at the diner just that morning, leaving her even more desperate, stood in painful contrast to the powerful man now depending on her care. In that small, leaking apartment, the children's desperate rescue had bridged worlds' emotions, churning with raw, moving intensity that evoked deep sympathy for a mother's silent endurance, and the compassionate light that refused to dim even in darkness. The night deepened, but inside the humble home a new layer of connection had been forged through crisis hearts torn and healing in equal measure. The dim light of the single bulb in the tiny Southside apartment flickered softly in the late hours of that October night in 2025. Outside, the Chicago wind carried a sharper chill seeping through the cracked windows and plastic coverings, reminding everyone of the cold nights that had become routine for the family inside. Lily Thompson knelt carefully beside the old couch where Jake Harlan rested her thin, malnourished hands, gently adjusting the makeshift bandage on his wounded arm. She was painfully slight, her frame weakened by years of hunger and exhaustion, her cheeks hollow from too many meals forgone so Emma could eat. Sleep-deprived circles darkened her eyes after another long double shift at the diner where she had stood on aching feet while customers barely noticed her quiet service. The apartment remained a heartbreaking symbol of absolute humiliating poverty. The walls marked by fresh water stains from leaks that went unrepaired. The refrigerator nearly empty, except for a small amount of oatmeal and a half-empty carton of milk. The threadbare rug, worn thin from years of dake, worried pacing. Cold, wind-filled nights had left their mark on Lily nights when she and Emma huddled together under thin blankets, listening to the landlord's threats or the distant sounds of a city that offered no mercy to the desperate. Lily's hands trembled slightly as she worked not only from fatigue but from the storm raging inside her heart. Horror and anxiety gripped her with violent intensity. After the ambush that had brought the powerful man bleeding to her door, she felt deep disorientation, a numbing dizziness that made the small room spin for moments at a time. Why had danger followed him here to their fragile sanctuary? Fear for Emma and Tommy clashed with a heightened curiosity about the man whose quiet strength now filled the modest space. Her voice remained soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to him. "Please hold still, Mr. Harlan. I am doing the best I can with what we have." Jake sat upright despite the pain, his fair-skinned, broad-shouldered frame still commanding even in vulnerability. The wealthy and powerful American mafia boss, whose legitimate construction and trucking empire gave him resources and influence few could match, felt the weight of his world pressing down with crushing force. Gnawing remorse tore through him like a blade remorse, for the ambush that had endangered not only himself, but now this destitute family who had already shown him such unexpected kindness. Violent inner conflict raged within his heart. The life he had built for protection and success now threatened the very people whose simple compassion had sheltered his son. Yet beneath the torment burned a profound, passionate attachment toward Lily that had taken hold from the very first moment he learned of her refusal of money and her willingness to help a lost child. This attachment created a compelling focal point of emotional upheaval. A fierce, protective love that clashed violently with his calculated existence and left him silently torn. While Lily tended to the wound, the children gathered close. Emma offered a clean cloth with pure compassion, her 8-year-old eyes wide with concern. Tommy helped by fetching water, his earlier distrust softened by the shared crisis, though sparks of wariness still lingered. The boy, Jake's son, sat nearby, his small face pale with worry for his father. In a quiet moment of condensed emotional stillness, as the wind howled outside and the apartment held its fragile warmth, Jake reached into his coat with his uninjured hand and pulled out an old, worn photograph he had carried for years. It was a small picture from years ago taken during a brief, long-forgotten encounter. As Lily leaned closer to examine it under the dim light, her breath caught sharply. The woman in the photo looked strikingly like her younger self, and the dates scribbled on the back matched a painful chapter in her past. Shock crashed over Lily with extreme psychological force. She felt a wave of numbness spread through her body, her knees weakening so suddenly that she had to steady herself against the couch. Confusion and deep disorientation flooded her mind, dizziness, making the room tilt as painful memories surfaced. Years earlier, in a moment of desperation, when she had been even poorer and more alone, she had crossed paths with a man whose name she had tried to forget. The child she had raised alone, believing the father long gone from her life, was suddenly revealed in a new light. Old hospital records and a simple comparison of features confirmed the truth in that heartbreaking instant. The lost boy who had first knocked on her door was not a random neighborhood child. He was Jake's biological son, the child she had carried and raised in secret, fearing the dangerous world the father inhabited. The revelation struck Lily like a physical blow. Her inner world tore violently apart, horror at the years of struggling alone with the truth, anxiety over what this meant for Emma and the fragile safety she had built, and a numbing pain that left her momentarily unable to speak. The mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty now faced the shocking reality of sudden connection to a wealthy and powerful man. Unreasonable and unjust situations from her past flooded back with brutal clarity: the nights she had cried silently after working double shifts while pregnant, the humiliating visits to assistance offices where she was questioned endlessly, the cold, wind-filled evenings when she wondered how she would feed one more mouth. These memories evoked deep sympathy and tears, laying bare her utter misery and the silent torment she had carried for so long. Jake stared at Lily, his sharp blue eyes widening with overwhelming shock that mirrored her own. The truth hit him with violent intensity. This woman who had opened her door to his son without knowing their connection had been raising his child in secret amid heartbreaking poverty. Gnawing remorse consumed him like fire, remorse for the years lost, for the distance his dangerous life had created, and for the suffering Lily had endured alone. Violent emotional conflict raged within him. Fierce paternal love for the son he had only recently begun to truly see, clashing with profound guilt and an intense burning attachment toward Lily that had grown passionately from the first moment of her kindness. His wealth displayed in the convoy, waiting outside the resources that could have changed their lives years earlier, now felt like a cruel mockery against her thin, malnourished frame and the pitiful conditions surrounding them. How could he have been so blind? The inner tearing deepened into a storm of protection and regret that left him quietly shaken. In the quiet that followed the revelation, another condensed emotional stillness wrapped the small apartment. The wind continued outside, but inside the only sounds were soft breathing and the faint rustle of the old photograph. Emma and Tommy sensed the weight of the moment, sitting close without fully understanding their innocent presence, adding another layer of moving depth. Lily finally spoke, her voice soft and trembling yet polite. "All these years, I thought you were gone. I was so afraid for him, for us." Tears welled in her eyes as the violent intensity of her emotions broke through confusion, giving way to a passionate surge of trust and attachment mixed with the deep pain of years spent powerless and alone. The disparity felt overwhelmingly cruel, her humiliating struggles against Jake's increasing display of restrained power and resources now turned toward protection rather than distance. Jake reached out gently with his uninjured hand, not to offer money this time, but simply to acknowledge the shared truth. "I never knew," he said quietly, his voice rough with remorse. "But I know now, and I will not turn away again." His words carried the depth of a man whose heart was violently torn between the shadows of his world and the light of this small family. Another tense street confrontation unfolded outside, as rival scouts passed nearby, forcing his men into a careful, bold diversion without violence. The suspense heightened the drama, reminding Jake of the dangers that still circled. Yet his focus remained on the apartment, and the woman whose quiet strength had begun to heal wounds he had long ignored. The revelation bonded them in ways words could not fully capture. Lily felt an overwhelming trust take root, passionate and intense, despite the fear and disorientation that still lingered. Jake's protective love deepened into a fierce commitment, his inner torment transforming into determination to shield this family from further harm. The children, sensing the shift, offered small comforts, Emma sharing the last piece of a saved apple, Tommy staying close without his usual warnings. In that humble, leaking apartment, amid the stark contrast between Lily's pitiful poverty and Jake's powerful wealth, the shocking biological truth had opened a new chapter. Emotions churned with raw, moving intensity, Lily's mix of shock, pain, and budding hope. Jake's remorse, guilt, and profound attachment evoking deep sympathy for a mother's silent years of struggle and the compassionate heart that had never stopped trying. The night stretched on, but the bond that had begun with a simple knock on the door now deepened through revelation and shared vulnerability, hearts healing slowly in the quiet warmth of unexpected connection. The late October night in 2025 wrapped Chicago's South Side in a cold, damp stillness, the wind whispering through the cracks of the tiny apartment like an old familiar sorrow. Inside, the single bulb cast its faint glow over the worn kitchen table, illuminating the faces of those gathered there in a fragile circle of warmth. Lily Thompson sat quietly, her painfully thin frame still trembling slightly from the emotional weight of the revelation that had shattered and reshaped the night. She remained malnourished and sleep-deprived, her hollow cheeks and shadowed eyes bearing witness to years of desperate struggle. Double shifts at the diner where she served with a polite smile, while her feet ached and her tips barely covered the basics, nights of biting cold wind that left her and Emma huddled together under threadbare blankets. The apartment continued to reflect the absolute extremity of humiliating poverty, water stains creeping down the walls from unrepaired leaks, the refrigerator holding little more than a few packets of oatmeal and a small amount of milk, eviction notice still taped to the door, like a relentless reminder of powerlessness. Absurdly unfair events continued to pile upon her, the latest cut in hours at the diner just that morning, forcing her to choose between bus fare and groceries once again, leaving her dizzy with anxiety and numb with humiliation. Lily's inner world churned with violent intensity. The shocking biological truth that the boy she had raised alone was Jake's son had left her in deep disorientation, a painful numbness that made her question everything she had endured in secret. Horror at the years of silent suffering mixed with a heightened curiosity and an overwhelming surge of trust that burned passionately from the first moment Jake had shown genuine remorse rather than dominance. Her voice stayed soft, timid, and polite when she addressed him. "The bandage should hold for now, Mr. Harlan. Please rest if you can." Jake Harlan, the wealthy and powerful American mafia boss whose construction and trucking empire commanded respect across the city, sat with his bandaged arm resting carefully on the table. His fair-skinned, broad-shouldered presence filled the small space with quiet authority. Yet tonight it carried layers of visible vulnerability. Gnawing remorse tore at him with increasing force, the years lost to his son, the danger his world had brought to Lily's door, and the profound guilt of not knowing the child had been raised in such pitiful conditions. Violent inner conflict raged within his heart, the calculated life of influence and shadows clashing against a fierce protective love for this small family and a burning attachment toward Lily that had taken root passionately from the moment she opened her door. His wealth was displayed with growing intensity in the convoy of sleek black SUVs waiting outside, and the resources he could summon with a single call. Yet in this humble apartment it felt distant and insufficient against Lily's thin, exhausted frame and the leaking walls around them. The children, Emma, Tommy, and Jake's son, sat close together, their innocent presence a gentle counterpoint to the heavy emotions in the room. A moment of condensed emotional stillness fell as the wind outside softened, and the only sounds became the faint hum of the old refrigerator and the quiet breathing of those gathered. In that stillness, Tommy's young face reflected his own inner battle. The 8-year-old boy, shaped by his own broken home and years of disappointment, had carried deep distrust of powerful men like Jake. But the events of the night, the ambush, the injury, the revelation, and the way Lily and Emma had cared without hesitation began to chip away at his defenses. Tommy stood suddenly, his small hands clenched. "I need to see something," he said quietly, slipping out the door before Lily could stop him. He moved through the dark alley with the street-smart caution he had learned too early, following the distant sound of engines. What he witnessed in the shadows became his turning point. A tense, bold confrontation was unfolding a block away. Rival scouts from an opposing faction had approached Jake's waiting men, their vehicles idling aggressively under the streetlights. Sharp words were exchanged, challenges about territory and respect, creating a charged standoff that heightened suspense without violence. Jake's men held their ground with disciplined calm, but the rivals pressed testing boundaries in the night. Tommy hid in the shadows, heart pounding, expecting the worst from men of power. Instead, he saw something unexpected. One of Jake's associates quietly handed a small bundle of supplies to a nearby homeless family who had been watching fearfully from the sidelines, an anonymous act of help with no demand for loyalty or repayment. The rivals eventually withdrew after Jake's men issued firm but measured warnings, and the convoy remained protective rather than aggressive. Tommy returned to the apartment minutes later, his face changed. He stood before Jake, eyes wide, with a mix of shock and newfound understanding. "I saw what your people did out there," he said, his voice trembling but clear. "You did not have to help those people. My dad always said men with power only take. But you gave without making them owe you anything." The confession carried the weight of his own pain, years of abandonment and empty promises that had fueled his distrust. Witnessing true kindness from someone he had feared cracked something deep inside him, creating an emotional turning point that left him quietly tearful. The revelation struck the room with moving depth. Lily felt a fresh wave of extreme psychological shock dizziness washing over her as she processed Tommy's words. Her inner turmoil escalated violently confusion and lingering fear, giving way to an overwhelming surge of trust and attachment toward Jake. The mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty now faced the disorienting reality of being protected and valued by a powerful man whose actions proved compassion could exist even in his shadowed world. Unreasonable injustices from her life flooded back with numbing force. The humiliating times she had been denied aid due to paperwork errors, the cold nights when wind howled through the apartment, while she wondered how she would keep Emma warm, the latest absurd cut in diner hours that left her even Duckham and more powerless. These memories tore at her heart, evoking deep sympathy and quiet tears for the silent suffering she had carried alone. Jake looked at Tommy, then at Lily, his sharp blue eyes filled with profound emotion. The boy's words deepened his gnawing remorse, the realization that his world had the power to help yet had often failed to do so in the ways that truly mattered. Violent inner conflict raged within him. Remorse for the years his son had grown up without him, guilt over the danger that had followed him here, and a fierce, passionate, protective love for Lily that burned with increasing intensity from the Briangleg first moment of her kindness. His wealth, displayed in the resources that could repair roofs, pay bills, and provide security, now felt like a tool he wanted to use not for control but for genuine healing. The attachment toward Lily created a compelling focal point, a deep emotional upheaval that transformed his inner torment into quiet determination. Another condensed emotional stillness settled as Tommy sat down beside Emma, the children, sharing a small saved piece of bread in simple solidarity. Jake spoke softly, his voice carrying the weight of a man laying down part of his armor. "Kindness like yours, it changes things. I have spent years building walls. Tonight I see how much I have missed." His words revealed the depth of his inner struggle, a violent tearing between the powerful life he knew and the humanity he was rediscovering through this destitute family. Lily listened, her soft voice emerging with timid politeness. "We only did what anyone should do for a child, or for someone in need." Yet inside her emotions churned with raw intensity, shock giving way to passionate trust, fear transforming into a burning attachment that left her heart aching with both pain and hope. The disparity remained painfully vivid, her malnourished, sleep-deprived existence against Jake's increasing display of restrained power and resources now turned toward quiet protection. As the night deepened, another tense street confrontation occurred when rival vehicles passed slowly nearby, forcing Jake's men into a careful, bold diversion that maintained safety without escalation. The suspense reminded everyone of the shadows that still lingered. Yet inside the apartment, Tommy's turning point had opened a new bridge of understanding. The children's innocent presence, Lily's quiet strength, and Jake's deepening remorse created moments of moving stillness amid the emotional storm. In that humble, leaking apartment, amid the stark contrast between poverty and power, Tommy had witnessed true kindness, and his heart had begun to heal. Lily's inner world continued to tear and mend in equal measure. Her utter misery laid bare, yet met with an overwhelming surge of trust that promised something new. Jake's violent inner conflict found a measure of peace in the simple acts unfolding around him, his protective love for this family growing fiercer with every quiet moment. The wind outside eventually softened, but the emotions inside remained deep and genuine, evoking tears for a mother's long-hidden struggles and the compassionate light that had drawn even the hardest heart toward redemption. The gray light of a new October morning in 2025 filtered through the plastic-covered windows of the tiny South Side apartment, casting soft, uneven patterns across the worn kitchen table. Lily Thompson stood at the stove, stirring a simple pot of oatmeal with water, her painfully thin arms moving with the slow care of someone who had learned to make very little stretch far. She was malnourished and sleep-deprived, her hollow cheeks and shadowed eyes, telling the silent story of too many double shifts at the diner where she served with a polite smile. While her body ached and her tips barely covered the rent, the apartment continued to reflect the absolute extremity of humiliating poverty. The walls bore new water stains from the latest leak. The refrigerator held almost nothing beyond a small amount of milk and a few packets of plain oatmeal and DS. The eviction notice on the door felt like a permanent shadow. Cold, wind-filled nights had left their mark nights, when Lily and Emma huddled together under thin blankets, listening to the wind howl and wondering how they would face another day. Absurdly unfair events kept piling on. Her hours had been cut again at the diner the previous day, due to a scheduling error made by someone higher up, forcing her to choose between buying bread or paying the latest utility bill, leaving her dizzy with anxiety and numb with humiliation. Lily's inner world churned with increasing intensity. The biological revelation, Tommy's turning point, and the quiet care she had given Jake's wound had left her in a state of deep emotional upheaval. She felt confused and guarded, yet an overwhelming trust and attachment toward Jake burned passionately from the very first moment he had shown genuine remorse rather than power. At times she was desperate and powerless. At other moments a timid hope flickered alongside lingering fear. Her voice remained soft, timid, and polite when she addressed him. "The oatmeal is ready, Mr. Harlan. It is not much, but it is warm." Jake Harlan sat at the small table, his bandaged arm resting carefully, his fair-skinned, broad-shouldered frame still filling the modest space with quiet authority. The wealthy and powerful American mafia boss, whose legitimate construction and trucking empire gave him fleets of vehicles and influence across the city, felt the weight of his emotions more heavily than ever. Gnawing remorse tore at him with violent force, the years his son had grown up without him, the danger his world had brought to this fragile home, and the profound guilt of realizing how much Lily had suffered alone. Violent inner conflict raged within his heart, the calculated life of shadows and control clashing against a fierce protective love for Lily and the children that had grown intensely from the first moment of her kindness. His wealth was displayed with increasing intensity in the convoy, waiting discreetly outside, and the resources he could summon instantly. Yet here, in this leaking apartment, it felt insufficient against the pitiful conditions surrounding him. The children, Emma, Tommy, and Jake's son, gathered around the table, their innocent energy bringing a fragile brightness to the morning. They shared the simple oatmeal, passing the single spoon they had in turns, and talked about small American joys, backyard games they dreamed of playing, the taste of peanut butter sandwiches, and the excitement of possible fireworks on future holidays. These shared moments created pockets of quiet, condensed, emotional stillness. The gentle clink of bowls, the children's soft laughter, and the faint hum of the old refrigerator. In those still moments, healing began to take root slowly, like the first warmth after a long winter. As the morning progressed, Jake stepped outside briefly to speak with his men. Another tense, bold street confrontation unfolded unexpectedly when rival scouts appeared at the end of the block, their vehicles idling in a clear challenge. Sharp words were exchanged about boundaries and respect, creating heightened suspense, as Jake's men held their ground with disciplined calm. The rivals eventually withdrew without escalation, but the encounter left Jake's inner torment deeper. He returned to the apartment carrying a quiet determination, his remorse fueling a fierce resolve to protect this family from the shadows that followed him. Lily watched him re-enter, feeling a wave of shock and confusion wash over her. The sight of his powerful presence returning to their humble space left her dizzy with disorientation, a numbing pain that reminded her of the stark disparity. Her utter misery felt laid bare, the humiliating reality of serving food she could rarely afford herself, the cold nights when wind whistled through the cracks, the endless cycle of choosing between heat and food. Yet alongside the fear, a passionate attachment burned intense and overwhelming as she witnessed Jake listening to the children with genuine interest rather than dismissal. The group moved to the small living room area for a simple shared moment. Emma and Tommy pulled out their few crayons and old receipts, drawing pictures of houses with lights on and families gathered around tables. Jake's son joined them, and soon the drawings included backyards, baseball games, and American flags waving on the 4th of July. Jake sat nearby watching with quiet intensity. The innocent creativity stirred violent inner conflict within him. Remorse for the simple joys his demanding life had caused his own son to miss, clashing with a profound, burning, protective love for Lily that had become a compelling focal point of his emotional world. Lily offered Jake a small glass of water, her voice soft and polite. "We do not have much, but you are welcome to share what we have." Inside, her heart tore violently. The mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty now faced the disorienting warmth of being noticed and protected by a wealthy and powerful man. Another absurdly unfair memory surfaced. Just weeks earlier, she had been denied extra assistance at the welfare office because of a paperwork technicality, leaving her even more powerless and humiliated. These injustices evoked deep sympathy and quiet tears for the silent struggles she had carried for so long. Jake accepted the water with genuine gratitude, his sharp blue eyes reflecting layers of deep emotion. "This means more than you know," he said quietly. His words carried the weight of a man whose gnawing remorse was slowly transforming into determination. The disparity between his world of resources and Lily's pitiful conditions only deepened his inner upheaval, a fierce attachment that burned passionately, making him question the walls he had built around his heart. As the morning continued, the children's laughter filled the small space, creating more moments of condensed emotional stillness. They played a simple game of I Spy with objects in the apartment, turning even the worn couch and old radio into sources of joy. Tommy, still processing his turning point from the night before, shared a small story about his own dreams of a safer neighborhood, his voice carrying less distrust and more hope. Jake listened attentively, his powerful presence tempered by humility that moved everyone in the room. Lily felt her knees weaken slightly from the emotional intensity, a wave of numbness and pain washing over her, as she reflected on the years of cold, wind-filled nights and humiliating struggles. Yet an overwhelming trust had taken firm root, passionate and intense, creating a violent tearing between her old fears and the new possibility of protection and care. The mindset of someone once desperately poor now faced the shock of being valued by a man whose wealth could change everything, yet who chose to sit in their modest home and share their simple moments. Another tense street confrontation occurred when rival vehicles passed slowly nearby once more, forcing Jake's men into a careful, bold diversion that maintained safety without violence. The suspense reminded Jake of the shadows that still circled, heightening his inner conflict and his resolve to shield this family. In the quiet that followed, Jake spoke from the heart. These moments, they remind me what I have missed. I want to help not out of obligation, but because it is right. His words revealed the depth of his emotional layers, remorse transforming into quiet, healing, protective love, growing fiercer with every shared American moment. Lily listened, her soft voice emerging with timid politeness. We have always tried to do what is right, even when it was hard. Her inner world continued to tear and mend confusion, giving way to hope, fear yielding to attachment. The disparity remained painfully vivid, her malnourished, sleep-deprived existence against Jake's increasing display of restrained power, now directed toward gentle support. The morning stretched into a slow, healing rhythm. The children's drawings covered the table, filled with houses that had lights on and families that stayed together. In that humble apartment, amid the stark contrast between poverty and power, shared American moments were weaving threads of connection and slow healing. Emotions churned with genuine, moving depth. Lily's mix of lingering anxiety and passionate trust, Jake's violent inner conflict softening into determination, the children's innocent joy lighting the way forward. The wind outside had calmed, but inside hearts continued their profound journey, evoking deep sympathy for a mother's long endurance and the compassionate light that had begun to heal even the hardest wounds. The chill of late October in 2025 deepened over Chicago's South Side as evening settled once more around the tiny apartment. Inside, the single bulb cast its familiar weak glow, illuminating the worn table where Lily Thompson sat with trembling hands folding the few clean clothes they owned. She was painfully thin and malnourished, her frame weakened by endless skipped meals and double shifts at the diner, where she served with a polite smile while her body cried out for rest. Sleep deprivation left dark circles under her eyes, and the cold, wind-filled nights had become a cruel routine, huddling with Emma under thin blankets as drafts whistled through the cracked windows and water stains spread across the walls. The refrigerator stood nearly empty again, holding only a small amount of oatmeal and a half carton of milk. The eviction notice on the door felt heavier than ever after another absurdly unfair blow. Her hours had been reduced once more that afternoon due to a manager's arbitrary decision, leaving her short on rent and forcing her to explain to Emma why they might lose the lights again. The humiliation burned deeply, leaving Lily desperate and powerless, her inner world a storm of violent intensity. Lily felt dizzy with disorientation as she worked, a numbing pain spreading through her as anxiety and lingering fear clashed with the growing trust she could no longer deny. The biological revelation and the shared moments of healing had stirred an overwhelming attachment toward Jake, passionate and intense from the very first moment he had shown remorse rather than dominance. Yet she remained guarded, her voice soft, timid, and polite when she spoke to the children. "Stay close tonight, please. The wind is strong outside." The children, Emma, Tommy, and Jake's son, played quietly near the couch, their innocent laughter a fragile light in the dim space. Jake Harlan sat at the table, his bandaged arm, a reminder of the previous night's ambush. The wealthy and powerful American mafia boss, whose construction and trucking empire commanded respect and resources across the city, carried a heavier burden tonight. Gnawing remorse tore at him with increasing violence, the danger his world had brought to this family, the years lost to his son, and the profound guilt of realizing how much Lily had suffered alone in poverty. Violent inner conflict raged within his heart, the shadows of his life clashing against a fierce protective love for Lily and the children that burned passionately and created a compelling focal point of emotional upheaval. His wealth was displayed with growing intensity in the convoy of sleek black SUVs parked discreetly nearby, and the security detail that waited in silence. Yet in this leaking apartment it felt distant against the pitiful conditions surrounding him. A sudden urgent knock at the door shattered the quiet. One of Jake's trusted lieutenants entered, his face tense. "There has been a betrayal, sir. One of our own has leaked the location of this apartment to the rivals. They know you are here, and that you have grown attached to this family. They are coming." The words landed like a physical blow. Lily felt extreme psychological shock crash over her horror, surging through her body dizziness, making her grip the table as numbness spread through her limbs. Fear for Emma and the children gripped her with violent intensity. How could safety turn to danger so quickly? Confusion and deep disorientation tore at her mind. The mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty now faced the terrifying reality of being caught in a powerful man's world. Another absurdly unfair event struck her heart. The latest cut in diner hours had already left her desperate, and now this new threat threatened the small sanctuary she had fought so hard to maintain. Jake rose immediately, his broad shoulders tense with command, but his eyes revealed the violent inner torment ripping through him. Remorse consumed him like fire, remorse for bringing this danger to the only place that had felt safe for his son, guilt over the years of distance, and a fierce protective love for Lily that burned with passionate intensity from the first moment he had witnessed her kindness. The betrayal from within, one of his most trusted men turning against him for rival promises, escalated the drama into a life-threatening crisis, tearing his inner world apart with numbing force. His wealth and power, once a shield, now felt like a double-edged sword that endangered the very family he had come to cherish. The night erupted into chaos as rival vehicles approached the block. Tense, bold street confrontations unfolded in rapid succession. First, rival scouts blocked the end of the alley, their cars idling aggressively under the streetlights. Sharp words were exchanged, accusations and warnings, creating heightened suspense, as Jake's loyal men held their ground with disciplined calm, refusing to escalate into violence. A second confrontation erupted moments later, when another group tried to force their way closer to the building. Jake stepped outside briefly to direct his men, his voice firm and commanding, diffusing the immediate threat through authority rather than force. The suspense built relentlessly as the rivals pressed testing boundaries in the darkness. Inside the apartment, panic threatened to overwhelm. Lily gathered the children close, her thin frame shaking with anxiety and horror. "Stay behind me," she whispered, her voice soft yet urgent, polite even in terror. Emma and Tommy huddled with Jake's son, their small faces pale. The betrayal had escalated the drama into something far more dangerous, leaving Lily in deep disorientation, numbness, and pain washing over her as she reflected on the utter misery of her life. Cold, wind-filled nights, humiliating struggles at assistance offices, the constant fear of losing what little they had. The disparity felt cruelly vivid. Her powerless, malnourished existence suddenly thrust into the path of powerful conflicts she had never asked for. In a heart-pounding sequence of ultimate sacrifice and courage, the rivals made a bold push toward the building. One of the betrayer's signals had guided them too close. Jake, despite his injury, positioned himself protectively at the door, ready to shield the family at all costs. But it was Emma, the innocent Maine baby, whose compassion had started everything, who acted with fearless heart. She slipped past her mother with the small flashlight they used during power outages, running into the fray just enough to shine the light and create a distraction, shouting, "You do not have to be alone anymore." Her pure act of bravery drew Fakan attention away from the apartment, long enough for Jake's men to regain control. Tommy, using his street knowledge, helped guide Lily and the younger children through a hidden alley shortcut he knew from his own hard life, leading them to temporary safety behind a neighboring building. Lily felt her heart tear violently, horror for her daughter's safety, anxiety that threatened to overwhelm her, yet a passionate, burning attachment toward Jake and the children that refused to break. The mindset of someone once desperately poor now faced the extreme psychological shock of risking everything in a powerful man's world while being protected by his care. Jake turned the tide with calculated commands, his men neutralizing the immediate threat through presence and authority rather than brutality. The betrayal had been exposed, the rivals forced to withdraw into the night after a series of tense, bold confrontations that heightened suspense without crossing lines. But the cost was high. Jake's inner world was violently torn apart by remorse for the danger he had brought and gratitude for the family's courage. When the immediate crisis passed and everyone returned to the apartment, a heavy, condensed, emotional stillness fell. Lily collapsed into a chair, dizziness and numbness, making the room spin as tears finally came. The violent intensity of her emotions left her shaking fear, giving way to overwhelming trust horror, transforming into a deep, passionate attachment that burned from the first moment Jake had valued her kindness over power. The betrayal and raid had escalated the drama to its peak, exposing her utter misery and inner torment in the most raw way, evoking profound sympathy for the mother who had endured so much yet still opened her door and her heart. Jake knelt before her, his powerful frame humbled by the night's events. His gnawing remorse reached new depths, clashing with a fierce protective love that had become the center of his emotional world. "I will not let this touch you again," he said quietly, his voice rough with genuine feeling. "You have given me back something I thought was lost." In that small leaking apartment, amid the stark disparity between Lily's pitiful poverty and Jake's increasing display of restrained power, now turned entirely toward protection, the ultimate sacrifice twist had forged an unbreakable bond. The children gathered closed their innocent presence, a beacon of hope. Emotions continued to churn with raw, moving depth, Lily's mix of shock pain and passionate trust, Jake's violent inner conflict softening into unbreakable commitment, while the night's betrayal had revealed the true strength of simple kindness in the face of darkness. The wind outside howled once more, but inside a new resolve had taken root, hearts torn and healed through courage, compassion, and the quiet power of opening a door when it mattered most. The first faint light of dawn crept through the plastic-covered windows of the tiny Southside apartment on that final October morning in 2025. The storm had passed, but the cold wind still whispered reminders of the long, difficult nights Lily Thompson had endured. She stood near the table, her painfully thin and malnourished frame moving with quiet exhaustion after yet another sleepless night. Deprived of proper food and rest for so many years, her hollow cheeks and shadowed eyes told the silent tale of double shifts at the diner where she served with a polite smile, while her body weakened and her tips barely kept the lights on. The apartment remained a deeply pitiful picture of humiliating poverty water stains, spreading across the walls from leaks that were never fixed, the refrigerator holding almost nothing, and the eviction notice still taped to the door like an unrelenting shadow. Cold, wind-filled nights had left their mark nights, when she and Emma huddled together under thin blankets, wondering how they would survive another day. Absurdly unfair events continued to test her. Another sudden cut in hours at the diner the day before had left her even more desperate and powerless, forcing impossible choices between rent and groceries. These injustices tore at her heart with violent intensity, leaving her dizzy with disorientation and numb with the weight of years spent struggling alone. Yet in the quiet of this new morning, something had shifted. Lily felt a profound mix of lingering fear and an overwhelming surge of trust that burned passionately from the very first moment Jake had shown her genuine respect rather than judgment. Her voice remained soft, timid, and polite when she spoke. "The children are still resting. Please sit if you need to, Mr. Harlan." Jake Harlan, the wealthy and powerful American mafia boss whose legitimate construction and trucking businesses had built him an empire of resources and influence, sat across from her with his bandaged arm resting on the table. His fair-skinned, broad-shouldered presence carried both strength and vulnerability. Gnawing remorse tore through him with increasing violence. The betrayal that had endangered this family, the years his son had grown up without him in poverty, and the deep guilt of realizing how much Lily had suffered alone. Violent inner conflict raged within his heart, the shadows of his dangerous world clashing against a fierce protective love for Lily and the children that had grown into a passionate burning attachment from the first moment she opened her door. His wealth was displayed with growing intensity in the convoy of sleek black SUVs waiting outside, and the security that now stood guard with quiet vigilance. Yet here in this humble, leaking apartment it felt secondary to the simple human connection that had healed. Parts of him he thought were lost, forever. The children, Emma, Tommy, and Jake's son, began to stir their innocent faces, showing the toll of the frightening night, but also the resilience of youth. A moment of condensed emotional stillness settled over the small kitchen as the first rays of sunlight touched the table. In that stillness, Jake looked at his biological son, then at Lily, and the truth of their shared past washed over him once more with extreme psychological force. He felt dizzy with the weight of lost time, and the profound realization that love and compassion could exist regardless of skin color or the vast gulf between wealth and poverty. These forces could not be separated by money or status. They transcended every barrier. Jake knelt slowly before his son, his powerful frame humbled. "You were never lost," he said, his voice rough with deep emotion. "I was the one who was lost until a little girl opened a door and showed me what family really means. I accept you fully as my son. From this day forward, I will raise you and protect you as my own. You, Emma, and Tommy will know safety and care. I choose family over the darkest parts of my world." the words carried the weight of full acceptance and redemption. Lily felt her knees weaken with shock and overwhelming emotion, a wave of numbness and pain giving way to tears. The mindset of someone who had known only desperate poverty now faced the disorienting reality of being loved and protected by a wealthy and powerful man whose heart had been touched by her quiet kindness. Her inner world tore violently between years of humiliation and this new possibility of hope. Unreasonable and unjust situations from her past flooded back. The cold nights deprived of sleep, the humiliating lines at assistance offices, the endless choices between food and heat. Yet they now stood beside a compassionate bond that proved love could bridge any divide. As Jake spoke, another tense street confrontation unfolded outside. Rival scouts appeared one final time at the end of the block, their vehicles idling boldly. Sharp words were exchanged in the early light challenges about loyalty and territory, creating heightened suspense as Jake's men held firm with calm authority. The rivals eventually withdrew, sensing the unyielding protection surrounding the apartment. Jake's inner torment reached its peak in that moment, remorse for past choices clashing with a fierce determination to build something better. This conflict taught a valuable lesson about the true meaning of strength, offering an important education in humility and the knowledge that real power lies in protecting the vulnerable rather than dominating them. The situation provided another lesson in compassion, reminding everyone that knowledge of another's pain can transform even the hardest heart. It was a profound education in the value of presence over possessions and the knowledge that kindness creates bonds wealth cannot buy. Through this experience came the lesson that every act of openness brings wisdom, and the education gained from shared hardship fosters deeper understanding. Ultimately, it imparted the knowledge that love and compassion rise above all differences. In the quiet that followed, the family gathered around the table for a simple shared meal. Emma and Tommy drew pictures of brighter futures houses with steady lights and families that stayed together. Jake watched with moving depth, his gnawing remorse softening into redemption as he committed to stepping back from the most dangerous parts of his world. He would use his resources to repair the apartment, ensure medical care, and provide stability, but more importantly, he would be present. Lily's overwhelming trust had become a passionate attachment, her heart no longer torn between fear and hope, but filled with the quiet strength of someone who had endured much and still chose kindness. These shared American moments, simple oatmeal crayon drawings and honest conversations, wove a richer tapestry of life lessons. The night's events offered a powerful lesson in courage, providing an education in resilience that no school could teach. They brought the knowledge that true family is built through compassion, not blood alone, and delivered another lesson in the healing power of openness. This experience granted the education of seeing beyond surface differences, and the knowledge that wealth and poverty cannot separate genuine human connection. It taught the lesson that every small act of kindness plants seeds of wisdom, offering an education in empathy that changes lives forever. Through it all came the knowledge that love transcends every barrier, the lesson that presence matters more than power, and the education that compassion is the greatest strength of all. As the morning light grew brighter, Jake looked at Lily with profound respect. "You showed me that compassion has no color and no price. Thank you for teaching us all what truly matters." Lily smiled softly, her voice gentle. "We all learned something precious here. In the end, the story reminds us that opening a door to a stranger can illuminate the deepest truths about humanity." This experience offered a valuable lesson in forgiveness, providing an education in second chances that reshapes destinies. It brought the knowledge that kindness bridges worlds and another lesson in the quiet power of presence. The situation delivered an education in humility, granting the knowledge that real strength comes from the heart. It taught the lesson that love knows no boundaries of wealth or background, offering an education in unity that heals old wounds. Through every moment came the knowledge that compassion is the light that guides us home. I wish everyone watching this video good health, a joyful life, and daily peace. Thank you for joining this journey. Please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with others so we can enjoy many engaging videos every day. How did this story make you feel? How does it connect to your own real life? Please share your thoughts in the comments below, so the creator can listen to the emotions from deep within your hearts. Goodbye for now, and I promise we will see each other again in the next video. Disclaimer: all stories on this channel are fictional and created solely for entertainment purposes. Any resemblance to real people, events, or places is purely coincidental.